Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Maritime Museum of Tasmania Lunchtime Talk. Before we begin, on behalf of Maritime Museum Tasmania, I would like to acknowledge the Pakana peoples as the traditional and ongoing custodians of the skies, lands, and waters of Rotorua. We pay our respects to the elders, past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. And it's a real pleasure today to introduce our new speaker, Coen, whose lifelong connection to the River Derwent and its vessel has led to the publication of a truly remarkable book called River and Coastal Vessels Trading out of Hobart. He was kind enough and brought a copy of it there, so if you want to have a look at the end of the talk, you're very welcome to. It's a great book. Tony's work is a comprehensive guide to the history of rivercraft and coastal traders operating out of Hobart, from the bustling boom years of the late 19th and early 20th century, through the gradual decline after the Second World War and into the current period of revival. He brings to life not only the vessels, but also the people and companies that kept Hobart's maritime life turning. Tony has a lot of great stories which he will share with us today, I hope. So please join me in welcoming him. And yes, hopefully you will share his stories and his research and also personal experience on the river. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much for that. Really interesting welcome, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah. Look, I've got a series of photographs here. I don't have to talk about the book because it's already been mentioned. And of course, the Maritime Museum has books for sale in its little shop there, and those books are in stock. So if anybody's interested. Anyway, we're here to talk about the history, I suppose, of the river coastal vessels and trade out of Hobart, mainly the ferries and the river steams. That's where my forte is, and I should probably mention the fact that I've been interested in this sort of stuff since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and especially after we moved the family home. Well, actually, the family built a house in Bellerive. We moved into it in 1950 when I was a couple of years old. So I do have some memories of the early 50s, not many, but some, or all of them related to the Bellerive ferries that ran in those days. So, and of course this lovely picture we've got here was a Mercury photograph taken in the last week of the operation of the Bellerive ferries, as most of us here will remember. Closed in 1963, June that year, and that was a typical scene on board Derwent before it leaves Bellerive. If it was taken in June, I'd say it must be the 8 o'clock ship because of the angle of the sun coming in, so it would have been dark half an hour earlier than that. So the 8 o'clock ferry was normally the busiest one of the morning. Anyway, that's another story. I should talk a little bit, I suppose, before we get into the 60 or 70, 60 I think, photographs I've got there. So I can't mess around too much, but my background in getting interested in the ferries wasn't really the ships and so forth so much, it was the power of steam. That's where my background is, and I was probably encouraged to get myself interested in steam because of my father, who was always talking about steam, and his father, of course, our grandfather, and my two sisters are here too, by the way. So they remember parts of this, not all of it. And my grandfather at one stage was a ship's engineer. So he was a steam man, of course, and when his boys were young, he used to go and visit some of these ships and have a meeting with some of his old comrades, and of course let the boys loose in engine rooms. Engine rooms in those days were much better than what they are today, all buttons and clean and so forth. We had ships burning coal and or oil, but machinery was all the big triple expansion type engines, or some were turbines. So So that's where my interest came from, was steam. Of course, that went into railways as well. So I became eventually a railway man. I was a locomotive engineman, and I reached the stage of driver eventually. And I worked on all types of engines, diesel and steam. And I still do that. I'm tied up in the tourism heritage railway world, Transport Museum in Glenorchy, Don River Railway, and those sort of things. And I also had, at one stage, we had our own company running steam trains from here to National Park. Unfortunately, we won't be able to do that anymore because something is going to stop us from getting trains out of the Hobart area. And it won't be long before we'll see the demise of the Bridgewater Bridge. And people seem to forget that that's the railway crossing of the river. It's the only one. There are no other ways of getting trains across the river except there at a low level. You can't get trains up on a high level quickly. They take a long time. So I don't know where else you're going to end up. Unfortunately, I've lost my battle. I've been having been doing a lot of lobbying with members of Parliament, every one of them except the Liberal Party, because it's a waste of time, to try and get the bridge to stop from being demolished and try to get a stay of execution on it, but they're having their way and they won't stop. So there we go. So you know the story. All right. Just briefly. Early days I was travelling on the ferries, of course. We were always running late to go to school when I was old enough to go to school on the mainland, in Hobart. And we lived up on this hill about a mile and a bit away from the ferry wharf at Bellerive. So when you got out of bed in the morning, you could look out the window and you could see the ferries down there. The steamers were running about 7 o'clock every morning to test the safety valves. You could remember that. You could hear safety valves blowing probably at Howrah. They used to really make a roar. And there was sort of an alarm clock. I do remember that quite well. And of course, then we were rushing to Terry around to run down the ferry wharf to catch the ferry. If you missed the 8 o'clock, you'd be late for school. If you caught the 8:30, it's too late, you see. But you still had to get to school and say, some excuse, the ferry was late or something, to get out of trouble. Anyway, we won't dwell on all those sort of things. I started getting interested in the history of ferries around about 1959 or 60 when I started jotting down the movements of ferries and the river steamers, not just Ferry ferries, the ones here in Hobart as well, which included Cartilla, Marana, Excella, Sorrento, and I remember Brian was a young fellow as well. Brian was still running before she was laid up, and I paid attention to Peter Roach, who's here today too. He's one of the sons of the Roach brothers that ran Cartilla, Marana, Excella and Brian, and Tura and Ena. There's quite a few vessels that Roaches were involved in. And it's good to see a family of seafarers still working on the river, just like it is with the O'May family. Peter O'May is still skippering one of the old, well not the old, the Spirit of Hobart, I think is the name of it. It's a ship that I'm not familiar with, but I've been on board it once. And Peter still works on her skippering most of the time, I think, I'm not sure, but he keeps it going. He's the same age as me, so it's good to see another family still doing the work on the river. But I started writing the history of things way back then and listening to people's stories and also reading books, Harry O'May's book of rivercraft, etc., George Cox's book, Shipping in Tasmanian Waters, and a few others, and I started using them as a Bible. They were the sort of foundation of what the history of the river steamers would all be about. But as time went by and I got into looking in the archives and talking to other people and other museums, I thought, no, there's more to this than that, and some of these stories aren't quite right. So I had to find the truth. And I still haven't found all the truth, but eventually I got around to printing that book that's there in 2017, it was published. And by that time I thought I knew everything, but since I've written it, I didn't know everything at all. People are still ringing up saying, you haven't got this and you haven't got that. So there's enough there to rewrite that book and get it really right. And I like to think if you're going to write a history book, it's got to have evidence to prove the things that you're saying. Cannot rely on hearsay because it's fraught with danger. You get all sorts of things. And so there we are. So there will be another edition of that come out when I finish doing another book on the railway. So, I have written a book, co-authored with another good author by the name of Lou Ray. It's called 150 Years of Railways in Tasmania. We printed that out in 2021. And we had to do that in a very short period of time because we weren't asked to do it until the last minute. And we were lucky enough to have all the stuff that we needed to write that. But it was a big job and it took quite an effort. Midnight oil burnt all around for quite a long time. Anyway, let's get on with the story. The photograph we've got there, looks taken in 1963, of course. That's we've already talked about what that is, but it's on one of the ferry runs in the morning when we took it. And that's one of the Bellerive ferries. Most of us here would remember Derwent and Rosny. This is the most favourite of everybody at Bellerive because Derwent got converted to diesel power in 1954. I think that's right. And she was never the favourite ship anymore because she was terrible. She was very, very noisy. She had two black stone engines that didn't have mufflers on them, so they roared on the main deck. You could hear yourself. And of course, it was cold in the winter, whereas the steamers had a big boiler to keep the whole ship warm. And not only that, she vibrated badly. So she wasn't a popular ship, but still, people caught the ferries. And when Derwent had to go on the slip, maintenance done to it, everybody welcomed Rosny back, and that was normally in the winter time, roughly, from my memory. So you appreciated the warmth. But that, I travelled on Rosny on the last day she ran, which was Regatta Day 1963. There were two ferries running the service that day, and I caught this 5:45 service back from Hobart on Regatta Day. We'd been to Regatta, and it was on Rosny, and we berthed where she is there. That was the reserve ferry's berth at Bellerive. And she never went out again until the photograph you see there. She was the first of the trio of ferries that were there, Derwent, Rosny and Ringmere, to be sold. And she went off to Launceston, but she went to Devonport at first, and this is the day she left to go to Devonport, and that was on the 5th of September 1963. And of course, there's Derwent's taken in 1956, loading up with passengers at Bellerive. Of course, there's diesel powered there, but I can just remember her as a steamer. There were things on board where they were slightly different to what they were on Rosny, and that's how I remember it, because I saw different things. Derwent in its early days, before it got burnt, in 1915 she got burnt right down. She was gutted to the hull. A fire that probably started in Stokehold, that's what they generally do. It was built in 1905, and when it was rebuilt, she was built slightly different. You'll notice the central part on the main deck there are 7 window panes. When it was rebuilt, the same as Rosny was, because she was a bit of a copy of hers, and there are 8 window panes. There are slight differences. The overhangs of the wheelhouses on Derwent, when she was first built, as you see there, they weren't there in later times, and so on. But she was quite a handsome ship, really. Own age, of course. That's taken the ferry pier, the Murray Street pier, today known as. Oh, that's the one I've got. Yeah, I can get that. Can't do that, I'll get that. Can't get that up, can you? Okay. What do I do that? Can't get it to work. Oh, there it is. That's it. I've got it there. Yes, that's a bit of Sydney Harbour, really. Derwent and Rosny, that's Rosny on the right. That's taken in the late 1940s, I think. I've had to work that one out, and I can't remember where I got these photographs from. I must add too that a lot of the photographs that are in the book, and some of them are here, courtesy of the Maritime Museum. I spent a lot of time in the Maritime Museum going through the collection of photographs that are in there, because I noticed some of them on display and they had wrong captions to them, so I asked if I could go through them and fix that up, which I did. And of course, whilst doing that, I selected a few of these photographs and had permission to put them in the book. So there's some very good photographs in the collection at the Maritime Museum. If you get a chance to look at them, do that. OMA's started off with small ships, of course. It was a rowing boat to start with. And then they built a series of little vessels. Small Enterprise was the first one, 1876. And then Success, which was a little bit different to Enterprise, but it was similar design but bigger, and then Result came along, which was almost the same as Success, but it was rebuilt in I can't remember when it was rebuilt, early 1900s, something like that, into what you see there. And she wasn't just a ferry, she used to do a lot of dragging of barges around the river and little things like that, sort of workship. But she ended the days up at the lime kilns, halfway up between Bridgewater and Boyer Mill on the left-hand side as you go up. And she's still there. If you get low tide on the top side of the lime kilns, you'll see a hull sitting in water. You might as well say she's still around. We all know the double guts, kangaroo. Bob Clipperville's catamaran today sends them all around the world. We had a catamaran here in 1855, there it is. Twin hull, big paddle wheel in the centre, in between the hulls, and two beam engines that drove beam engines, the ones that stand up on a post and they fit like this, turn the flywheel in this, they turn a central wheel. So unfortunately, when she was retired, everything was cut up and scrapped. But she ran backwards and forwards across the river for 70 years, which was a pretty good effort. Didn't get herself into much trouble, mind you. Before she had wheels in the proper wheelhouses, which it hasn't got there, she was steered by a tiller. And you can see the helmsman there on the stern quarter there, on the starboard side. You can see the arm of the tiller. Must have been hard yakka pulling it around sometimes with a little weather on. And so people recognised she was blind in other vessels and steered clear of her way. Anyway, and then she got old vessel, but she did the job for a long time. She was replaced, of course, by Lugarina, which came over. There's another shot of her. She's got wheels on there, steering wheels, and that's when O'May's had it, so that's taken in 1903, I think, where I went. Early 1900s, but it must be after 1903, I think. And the ship on the right was also a river vessel, river trader. Her name was Beautiful Star, and she came out here in the 1860s originally, not for ferry service. She was just a cargo ship coming out from England, and she brought a load of salmon over out here to start off the fishing industry thing up in what we have in the lakes today. But unfortunately, the owner died on the way, so they had to wait for another lot to come from England. But that's how she got here. She ended up as a river trader up the other river, and she got destroyed eventually in a fire, which also destroyed the bark Derwent Hunter, which was tied up at where the slipway is on the domain years ago, as a sort of a wharf. She was a retired ship too. Beautiful Star was alongside, and of course the fire went up and destroyed them. Next is quick one. The man, that's kangaroo, of course. You can see the paddle wheel hanging down between the holes. The man underneath, the closest to the camera, I should say, right at the front, that's James O'May. That's Peter O'May's great-great-grandfather or something. Can't remember how many greats there are in there, but it's from that side of the family where he comes from. Because they split up, the O'May brothers split up in the 1920s over the company that they formed with the Rosny Estates Company, and it was a failure. They wanted to sell land on there, so the ferries services and the realties people joined together to call themselves the Rosny Estates and Ferry Company, but it didn't go well. It broke up. So, and then, of course, other things people took over the ferry run. A bit complicated, so I won't go into all of that. You can read that in the book, it tells you all about it. So, and there's Lugarino. Who remembers Lugarino? Come on. Yeah.
Hot pies.
Yeah.
Hot pie.
Hot pie. Right. I don't remember here, of course, she's gone by the time I was born, but I remember her in Newcastle. That's where I last saw her. She was flying across to Stockton there until the 70s, and when a new bridge was built, like we've got here, and that displaced the particular ferries. In fact, Lugarino helped to put the pontoons of the floating bridge into place. She was one of the vessels, I think there's a photograph here of that. We're moving around here a bit. We've gone away from the Bellerive ferries, but this is the bow end of Melba, which was the first vehicular ferry that ran on the Breeding Island service. Melba, of course, was a coastal river steamer, one of the last ones built. It was the last, 1921. And so this is at Kettering, and some friends and I who owned the second bus there, went to Breeding Island for one of those wild weekends that young people do. That was back in 1973. So I managed to get up in the wheelhouse and get that photo. And while we were at Kettering, I thought I'd put that one in the box, Harry O'May, which came all the way from Hong Kong to help out with the bridge disaster. And of course he ended up down there. Today, poor old girl is just sitting looking terribly sad and dishevelled on the Tamar River at Longford near King's Wharf.
So sad.
It is, just sitting there.
Man on.
Yeah, Man On, that was the name, yeah. This is putting the first of the pontoons in place for the old bridge, the original bridge. You can see Lugarino way over on the far left side, the tall funnel that gives her away. What else was there? Rosny is there too. Rosny was the steering ship. She positioned herself across the end of the pontoon so they could move her around easier, so she was the steerer. And then in the middle, there's another vessel in the dark near Rosny and Lugarino. It's called Kenobi. I'm not sure what her history is. Cole might know that, but yeah. You might know what it is. Kenobi was her name. The small ship, she was involved in, and the one in the middle was Melba, when she was still a steamer. And she's got a big rig on the deck, which was used for pile driving and also for a bit of dredging. But beside her, between her and the side of the bridge, I don't know what it is, but there's a double-ended barge. It looks a bit like a ferry, a car ferry, with the superstructure taken off. And I don't know anything about it and where it came from, but at the time, since Sydney Harbour Bridge was built, I thought maybe it might have come from there, because a couple of the big Sydney ferries that were displaced by the bridge did end up in Tasmania. One of them ended up at Port Lather. So I don't know what it is. I'm trying to find that out. Someone might know. And some of us might remember some of the coal burners that used to come into Hobart and belch clouds of black smoke all over the place. I wonder what people think of that today. It's worrying. Never used to heard us then. But anyway, Golden was the ship's name. She was just an old tramper that used to come in and out regularly. And that's going through the wristband of the floating bridge. That was taken in late 1940s, I think. I've worked it out about that anyway. I haven't got a date for it. And there's another one taken from the bridge, I suppose, the Perthshire, the ship there. And Medina racing along behind to get under the bridge before it came down. Understand? He was in a hurry. Yeah. Interesting. Tugs. Boy, they're an interesting time over the harbour with tugs. Today they've got these tractors, as they're called, I think. They look like a tug, they just look like I don't know what they look like. But, they don't have the style of the old tugs. I mean, that's a small tug, buoyer, but there was there were naval tugs and so on. There were several of these built, and we ended up with two of them here eventually. But the other one was West Tamar, which came down here when the tow company started to name all their tows after capes, Cape Broody, Cape Perron, which was the other one, and so on. But boy, it wasn't, because she was owned by Australian Newspaper Mills. And that's there was some barges in the town, in the wharf, and that's taken 1957 around about. And there she is going through our famous bridge that I was talking about earlier. You notice the angle, the towing the barges coming through. You've got to go through there on an angle coming upstream, because when I say upstream, I'm thinking on a train. If you're on train, you say an up train is going to the capital city. A down train goes away from the capital city. This is coming downstream. That's the wrong way around, isn't it? So if you went straight ahead through there, you'll end up in the shallows over on the point there, Bridgewater, and be wrecked. So you have to go quite hard astern there to the start of the bit to come through there to get through. And people have commented too about the new bridge. If this one was allowed to stay there, the new bridge has got a pier which seems to be in the way. It's beyond the pier on this side, the pile on this side, it's a bit out, but there's plenty of room. I mean, vessels, when the old bridges were there, they had swing bridges on both. There's a railway one, the top side one, and the road one was the bottom side one, which was further down. They were in line, they were offset, and the vessels all had to go through on an angle, but there was a fender, like a jetty thing, a fender that right across between the two bits in case they got a bit lost and banged into things to steer them in the right direction. But there you go, that's, I won't see that happen anymore. I had to have something with cars here and Togo having a go at one another, but I've got that one.
So River, Tony?
Yeah, that's 1920 sometime, I don't know. Anyway, they've both got a full head of steam there. Yeah, you like that? You like that? Yeah. It's, I don't know where I got this from. It could be Maritime Museum photo, could be. Because it's about 1950, Brian was still running then. This was the Burley Island Shipping Service, as it was called, or the Roaches. You know who the chap is there unloading those box of apples, Peter?
Looks a bit like August.
Right.
No, yeah.
Yeah, that's a Brook Street pier. Of course, the funnel of gold was built there. Some clouds of black smoke was just over beyond Brianne. Brianne didn't last much longer after that. About 1952, I think she sort of pensioned off, and she ended up in Prince of Wales Bay for a long time.
When the River Island Ferry service started with the government.
That was 54.
That's when she stopped.
She stopped there. She stopped there, or did Excel keep going to leave?
No. Well, the government put the business out of business.
They did, for sure. They do that all the time, don't they? That's what government's for. Put business out. That's what they're doing. Yeah. I know a lot about that. Yeah. All right. Right.
She had those distinctive windows, Tony, with the bar up them.
Yes, interesting, weren't they? She was the only one like it, I think.
Yeah.
Interesting photograph. You've probably seen it before. But that's one of the best ones of the same shot. That's the paddle steamer there at Brook Street Pier, as it was, is Monarch, or Monarch, I don't know how you like to pronounce that. But she was the main, well, she was the first regular ship to run a regular service on the Norfolk run, because she started all the top well before the railway came, so you know, shipping was the only way to get stuff backwards and forwards. But notice all the sailing ships are on there. They're all barks except for one of them, the far end there, which is a brig. Some of those are whales, but not all of them. And you can always tell the whales because they've got those big longboats upside down on top of the deck. And or they've got a funnel sticking up from a boiling pot. That should boil up the blood. It's hard to tell. One of them's got one, I can't remember which one it is now. It's got a funnel on it. Anyway, that's a great photo. That would take it about 1870, because Lena is not built yet. It's only the original house. It's not been extended to, and that was in the 1870s. There's Monarch up near Norfolk. It's coming around the bend from Derbyshire Rocks. Quite a lengthy vessel, but back in those days, didn't have heaters and keep warm and things like that. It just put up with it. It didn't worry about being cold or hot, it just did it. People freeze to death like me, I don't like cold, I like to get out. Yeah. There's Derwent Hunter on the left. She was sort of permanently anchored there, tied up to the pier that was there, the jetty. She was a whaler, of course, in later years, an old bark, but this photo's taken in about 1890. The steamer on the slip is Tirana. She was on White House, I think, had it at one stage. This was built for White House. White House was built. She was built at Tirana, of all places, was probably why it's called Tirana. But she didn't look like that to start with. She was modified several times before it was finally left here, went away to New South Wales in the 1920s somewhere and got wrecked.
Question.
Yes?
What's that animal?
Pardon?
What's the animal on the right hand? The horse.
Ah, that's all. There's a horse, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a horse. You can see his head on the left dangling down. You see?
Just
Yeah, horse. Well, you know, that was in, when did I say that was? That would be 1901. Yeah, about 1901. So there were houses there. There was I suppose it was the slipmaster's house or something. It was there just on the bank. It's probably still there. Now there's an interesting photo. That's taken in 12th of March 1904, there's the exact date. They have a waterfront and so forth. I'll just read out the ships, I can't remember all the names of them, but from left to right, the main ones are Una, Australasian, Orontes, Surrey, and over the back, you can just see them in the mist behind the smoke, which is coming from the reclaimed area where we're going to try and build a stadium, which we won't, I know that. There is a couple of warships there. One of them is Royal Arthur. HMS is the emergency ships, Royal Arthur, and either Torch or Mutine. Not sure. There are two of them there. And there's a sailing ship in the foreground called Josepha or Niola, don't know the name. But the interesting one is the river steamer, way over the back there. I don't know the point to it. It's on the reclaimed area where it looks like a wharf going out. There is a river steamer in there, just work it out. It's Hopton came here, I've got another photo of her anyway. Hopton came here from Sydney as a double-ended paddle steamer Ferry. Her name was Jem, and it was rebuilt to make itself a useful cargo vessel to work on the channel runs. I wish somebody could tell me where that photograph's taken, because I can't work it out. It's down the channel, I believe, somewhere. The vessel tied up having a picnic by the look of it is the Yolla. Yolla was owned by Risby brothers. Risby's had a fleet of steamers and sailing vessels. None of them lasted very long. They all got wrecked, all at different times. And Yolla was one of them. And that's taken in the 1890s. But I just don't know where it is. Because there's another pier on the other side. It looks a little bit like around Dover, but I don't know where this land is in here in the foreshore, so I can't work it out. I don't know what the other ship is. But there, it's an interesting photo.
Could be in the Ewan, can't
It could be in the Ewan. Where? It's,
it's not very far across there, is it?
It's not that far. But you see, you've got 3 islands in Port Esperance, Faith Open Charity, we call them. One of them is a bigger one, but I don't think it's there because the terrain in the background, there's not enough stuff in the background to say that's Dover. It doesn't work. So I don't know. Here's another little coastal trader who used to go around the west coast quite a lot. I'd like to go around the west coast in that. That's Minx. Minx, the little steamer that was here in the 1880s. Very southwesterly on the wheels, and the man, the skipper up there, or whoever it is. But she's sitting in the harbour. But they did, this is what people do. They used to travel around and Trial Harbour on the west coast, of course, was named after a ship called Trial. But it was a trial to get a ship in there anyway. And they couldn't get them into land because there was no jetty except the anchor and all the weather they had. Just what way. Coen, that's a nice little list. It's got quite a bit of history, Coen. This photo's taken probably in the issue of Built, about 1882, I'd say the photo's taken. She looks new. You get the magnifying glass out at home on the laptop and blow that picture up. She looked brand new. There's not much there. There are a lot of people there seem to be having a good look at her. So I'd say, and that's Brook Street here again. So I'd say that's brand new Coen. She got rebuilt several times. She also turned over and sank in Don Pesto Channel in 1914, and she's got back up again, and she kept on going, and eventually she got broken up, I think, at Madonna, of all places, in later years. I think I'm not wrong about that. I just don't remember. But it's in the book. You've got to read the book to find it. But she started the trend in the style of real estate. Before they were just, a short bit of superstructure and pretty much open. And she started the trend to change things a bit by having a poop deck, which is higher, it's above the gunnels, above the bulwarks, I should say, and there's a saloon down below underneath that. So, and a hot cargo holder to fire it in, and improvements to that type of vessel meant that was the style we were going to adopt for all of them. So we had Coen was the first, we had New Bena and Tirana, and all those are all very similar. That's Coen in her later life, before she went into the fishing business, I think. And that's taken in 1920, about 1920. In the background there too, there's a steamer there by the name of Waniora. Anybody heard of her? Waniora? There was a bit of a song. I heard some chap on the radio one day talking about it, and he sang the song, and it was all about people waiting for freight to come in from the mainland on this ship. And the song always ended up in each phrase to say, because it's on the Waniora. That's how that end of the tune went, because it talks about people waiting for all this stuff and water coming. So Waniora was renowned as a very slow old crank, where are we? Peter, you wouldn't remember it like this, but you might remember what we call Tura, which your fathers and so forth had. Tura, as you originally looked, it was the name of Ivy. Condons were the name of the people that ran a couple of river steamers. Ivy was one, and the other one was Reliance, which was quite a big ship. And didn't have either of those ships for a long period of time, and that one was sold off to the Marine Board in the early part of the 20th century. I just can't remember, 1912 rings a bell. And she was rebuilt to suit the needs of the Marine Board, and they used it for general work around the harbour, and also to take people out on special charters. As you always see on Regatta Day, bunting and flags all over, taking members or dignitaries around the harbour for the Regatta Association and things like that. It didn't look like that then. We duck back to Romania. Here's their victory. All of our main ships started off with names that referred to a part of the life of the company, the successes it had with each ship. So the first one was Enterprise, and then they got to Success. That wasn't good enough, so there was a result. That's right. And then, of course, it went to Victory. We've done it. We've got the best one of all. Here she is. But they went further. They went to Silver Crown. That was the crowning name. That's how all the names progressed along through in the 18 ships. So that's which is fairly new. Victory in Kangaroo Bay in about 1885.
Where there's no houses.
No houses. No, that's Rosny Point up there. Or Rosny Hill, I should say, not Rosny Point. If you look carefully, you'll see a house just in behind the trees where the foremast is on the ship. And there's a lot of cleared land over on the right. And I think that Captain had the Kangaroo for many years. Captain Taylor. He had a bit of a resort type of thing over there. And I think And of course, later on was a golf course there, of course, but I don't think that's anything to do with Captain Harbour. And that's where it is. We talk about Bridgewater Bridge again, eh? This was the road bridge, the second road bridge, then it became the second railway bridge. But here it's still the road bridge, so that makes that picture taken in 1902. Became the railway bridge again in 1906, and that turntable that's out there is the one that's still sitting out there off the blue span or I say the current bridge, because I prefer the current bridge and the other things. That little ship is Thistle, came from Devonport. She was one of the last little vessels that used to trade to Latrobe, from Devonport to Latrobe. Imagine that, yeah, that used to go there. But she came here and she worked up and down on coastal runs and also in New Norfolk a fair bit. But she was gone by the 1920s. It's in the book. You read it in there, you can read all that up in the book. Denison Canal opening at Dunelm. That's New Beaner in the rebuild stage. As I said, New Beaner was one of the brand that stemmed from the Hewen style. New Beaner was the second one. New Beaner got wrecked at Cremorne and a boiler is still sitting there on the beach. If the sand washes away, you'll find it. But in 1910, that had to be 1905. It was. That was the opening day. And no, that's not cut here. It's amazing. You see a photograph of the river steam and the people jump on and say, "Oh, it's cut here. I've been on that." But there were lots of ships like that, you see. And Dover was one of the faster ones. Very conspicuous, what a very big rake she had on the funnel. Notice the burn marks on the bottom of the stack.
Engine only did 70 RPM.
Huh?
Engine did 70 revs per minute.
70 revs on it. Oh, there, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Peter's a font of all knowledge. Very good.
She was the fastest off the mark.
Yeah. I know because she raced. She ran a few races, didn't she? Yeah. That's Christmas Day 1921. Just on a race here, party over during annual race. But sometimes she had to go fast because often she would be a spectatorship for when cars were on togo were racing. So she had to keep up with them, and she could, pretty much. A popular little workhorse on the river was Ronnie. And that's her there in the prime, about 1910, probably going out on a picnic somewhere down the river. But she was around right up until the last year, up at the graveyard at Old Beach. Yeah. That's Brook Street Pier again. Brook Street Pier. This is on the day of the launching of Excelsior, which is one of James Rowe's vessels. James Rowe was another big, there were two major shipping companies around the Apple boats and so forth, down the channel and the river. There was the Hewen Channel and Peninsula Steamship Company, one of them, which Cartier belonged to. Excuse me. And there was James Rowe and Sons that had some of these vessels. That's not one of those there. That ship there is Waldemar, which came originally from Sydney. And she was rebuilt to that style. Quite a nice vessel, but she went off the run in the 1920s, late 1920s, and converted to diesel because she had a fire on board, and she didn't last that much longer after that. I think she went to the graveyard too. The ship behind her is another one of Grizzly's vessels. Her name is Waina. She was the last steamer that Grizzly's had built for them to do the coastal work, and she got wrecked up off Morell Island. So they all didn't last, Grizzly ships. They just disappeared. Way over in the background there, on the left, behind Waldemar, there's the bow of Montgomery, I think there. But behind that is, I mentioned Hopton earlier. She was in that big photograph of all the ships on the harbour. Came out here as the gem, the double-ended paddler. That was a shipwright point, I like that photo. And there's unloading apples in, where is it? Elizabeth Street Pier, the old Elizabeth Street Pier, not the one there now, of course. In 1910, about that ship, Florida's Excelsior, that's what that previous photograph was celebrating. I think also the ship I was pointing to go. I've forgotten. But there's a number of vessels in that photograph. I think that's the one that's got them in there. No, I don't think it is. But the ship behind her is Ronnie. We just saw Ronnie minutes ago. But Excelsior was different because she had 3 decks. Right up on top behind the funnel. And the wheelhouse was raised up, as you can see there. And she was sold off to the Solomon Islands in about 1911. No, she didn't. She went to Queensland and became a pilot vessel. That's right, pilot vessel. Warrantina was another one of the old ships that used to do the coastal work. Gradually built up from pretty much nothing up on the top deck, on the main deck. Didn't have any superstructure, or very small, to something like that. It's in its later life. And that's in the 1910s there as well. There we go on time. I'll be moved. Right. Cartel, there she is. That's in her original glory. Brook Street Pier, taken about 1913, which was built in 1912, so it's fairly new. Right behind it, just in front of the wheelhouse of the cartel, you can see Excella. That's just the top deck of Excella. The 2 competing companies. Excella was James Rowe and Ewan Channel Company on with Cartier. But it's ironical to think that you can see that same image in the 1960s, still there. This is the 1910s, because those 2 ships were synonymous with one another for a lot of years and well known. That's at Cartier again at the Eagle Hawk Neck jetty. I think they're having a bit of trouble getting her alongside, but of course if you look carefully, you'll see the skipper's waving his arms around out the window. At the deckhand has got the line dangling over the rail there, trying to get him to put it somewhere so he can do a spring down. I think that's what he's up to. It's interesting.
It's blowing a bit, Tony.
Right?
It's blowing a bit. It's
It is
blowing a
blowing.
bit westward, isn't it?
It is blowing in there, yeah. He's having trouble there. I think his deckhand might be a rookie. There's another shot of cars here in later years, up at New Norfolk. That was in 1950s, according to your Hobart, I'll proper date for that. That's Morwena. That was another one of White House's little ships. It's taken on the opposite side of the river at New Norfolk to where the normal jetty is. That's on the railway side. There was a big jetty there. Morwena got destroyed by a fire in the war that was going on between River Steamship Company and O'May Brothers in 1929, when O'May's got back into the shipping business again, and they hired Morwena to run ferry services. One morning they found her gutted by a fire at Bellerive. The war was really bad then. Now that's an interesting one. That shipwright Point Regatta, again, I'll go from the left. Waina is on the left, it's the one right around, that's the Risby's one. There's Waldemar. And the one with the really tall funnel is the one I mentioned earlier, the Condens had, which was Reliance. Quite a big, long vessel. She ended up working in Western Port Bay, completely different to that, rebuilt. Hopeton is over behind her. Ronnie, Ewan and Excelsior. All in that order there. They're all jumbled up. So Excelsior's on the far right, the one that had 3 decks, open top deck. And the photograph taken off one of the Union Steamship Company ships that used to go to Shipwrights Point Regatta too. Could be in one of Paluna or Luna or some of that other one, Australia or something, Australia. And that's a more recent one. This is 1938, and I'll say more recent compared with the other one. Hobart Centenary Regatta. The warship out there is either one of the Hobart, Perth or Brisbane. I think, well, hang on, no, it's not. It's a very, what's the name? I forgot it here. Lost the place. HMS Hobart, Perth or Brisbane, yeah, in midstream. But you can see Cartier again and Excella coming in to push Cartier out so she can get her load of passengers. And Tura was out there too, because above Cartier in front of the first funnel of the warship. And at the stern of the warship heading downstream is Marana, which was another White House ship, which also ended up with the Ray brothers later. Regatta, that was a pretty busy and a very popular thing. It was a cruise around the harbour, as we all know. And there's New Norfolk Regatta. Does anybody recognise any vessels in that lot?
Rhino, Australia.
Yes, it is there.
Coen.
Yeah,
Cartier, of course.
yeah, Cartier was there. Marana was the one closest in. Yeah, so that's very good. That was 1920s. Again, don't know. Linda's Farm. That's the name of the one on the left. It's, she was a bit of a tumble down wreck when she came here, so it wasn't very popular, unreliable, had machinery breakdown. It came from Williamstown in Victoria, the Williamstown Ferry Service. And the Linda's Farm Ferry Company, another a group of people who didn't like the way the OMAs were running the ferry, so they went in opposition to them. They did this 2 or 3 times. That was the ship they had, but it was unsuccessful, and OMAs ended up owning it later. Silver Crown was the one behind it, after she'd been rebuilt with the top deck and everything on it. That was OMAs, of course. Photograph was taken, where are we? 1924, which means that OMAs had both of them by then. And it's Revere. We all remember Revere, don't we? Well, she ended up at Bellerive, of course, when the ferries finished in 1963. She was one of the ones that rebuilt from that, but she did the Linda's Farm run for a long time, until the bridge, the floating bridge, was put in place, and that took it up the Linda's Farm Ferry Service. So that was taken 1930s. And actually she was down the Huon River in 1964. She was the second of the Transport Commission ferries to get sold. And she was bought by people named Clark, who lived in Franklin. That jetty's still there, but it's not much of it left. But it's right beside the road. You couldn't miss seeing Revere when you were down there. That's where she was kept. But she used to, they bought her to cart machinery and animals and whatever to go across to Egg Island, which is behind her there in the middle of the river. But they never used it for that. They used it for a lot of cruises. And so that's what she did for a few years before she was sold off again and rebuilt as a trader for Clyde Clayton, who lived at Port Davey, and used to go down to King's Mine, which wasn't a steamer by then, she was a diesel. And that was, by the way, that's me there holding my younger sister, and the other two were sitting here today, and there they are on beside me. This is interesting. It's Elizabeth Street Pier again, the old Elizabeth Street Pier, the ship right in front of us. The interesting vessel. In this picture, she's still a paddle steamer. She was a stern wheeler. Her name was Lintrose. A big horrible iron vessel, which was built for the Nile River in Egypt. So she ended up on the mainland somewhere and became here. I had to read the book to find that out and find out the history of it. She had other names, but she was eventually converted into a twin screw vessel. But behind her is Ronnie, and there's a wrecked funnel will be Morse. Morse was another steamer, and I think the funnel beyond that could be Ewan. So I don't know, can't work it out. There's Lintrose as a screw ship. So she's a bit different. Notice where the wheelhouse is. It's behind the funnel, which is not a small funnel, it's quite a large one. She got wrecked off Iron Pot in 1932, I think. She was coming back from down river somewhere, or down in the peninsula somewhere, with a load of piles on board, and shifted in a bad sea, and she went down. They all got off her, of course, but that was the end of Lintrose. West Australia, interesting vessel, came from Perth in Western Australia. The original name was Ferry something, something Ferry. Manx Ferry, that's it, thank you. And she came here, Rose bought, James Rose and Sons, they bought it down here. She was always open, everything was open on board, and he rebuilt her like that. So she had 2 screws, 2 boilers, 2 engines and 2 funnels. Anyone like her?
And she was iron. She was iron.
She was on, yeah. And of course, she's still about. Not in very good nick, she's at the graveyard, Hobart, yeah. That was her again in those colours. That was about 1925, that photo. The other one was earlier. But you can see all there how she is.
Oh, beauty.
This is a good collection. I've got a couple of these photos. I thought they'd be interesting. There's Derwent and Stream, of course. On the left we've got Excella and a final guys, so she's already had all the engine swaps and boiler swaps she's ever going to get. More Weena in front of her. The ship across the Drinking Walk part here is Laura, and that would be in her 3rd guise. She did look like that when she first came here, and I think she's laid up because if you look carefully at her, there's a thing dangling off her and all sorts. But she gave her original engines to Excella when Excella was converted from a motor ship to steam, and they were built by Smelly and Company, unusual name, Smelly, in Brisbane, because Brisbane built Laura, and they built the engine as well. So Excella had that for a long time. She never ended up with that Smelly engine, she ended up with a Plenty, and I can't work out where it came from.
Waldemar.
No, she didn't have Plenty, she had a chain. Same as what Ian had, a Chapman Company engine.
Oh.
And so it didn't. Somewhere on the line, she got a swap over to get the Plenty engine in it. So I don't know where it came from. It could have come from Toura, because it was very underrated for Excella. She was slow, as you know, and she wasn't always slow. So she could get along, she had a decent engine. But Toura, which Roaches bought from Marine Board, converted it to a fishing boat. And they took the steam engine out. The steam engine wasn't to go in Excella, but I think it sat around on the foreshore over the ocean pier for a long time, and I think that could have ended up in it, but I don't know when or how it happened. Over on this side we've got Togo, of course, and then Silver Crown behind her on the left, and then to the right behind her is Melba. So I'll keep buzzing through those, but you'll see more of them. I talked about Waniora, that's her over in the back there on the left-hand side of the tall funnel. That's the Little Street Pier, the new one, the 1934 one. The little ships here on the left is Ena again, across the Franklin Wharf with the bow strip. That's how she was. She ended up as a Rory, and she's now Ena again, I think back in Sydney, I can't remember. Was she in Melbourne or Sydney now? Sydney, is she? Yeah, and she moved around a bit, restored to as she was then. Over on her left, behind her is Star, and the other one behind that is Ronnie, and then to the right of that is Aloma. Aloma was a motor ship, she always was. She never was a steamer. And then on this side we've got Marana at the front, and behind her is Kumila, a coastal trader. Our father, by the way, used to go tripping around on her. I knew the skipper quite well, or grandfather did. And Lugarine, of course, in the background behind that. Keep whizzing through. There's another one, similar thing. We have Cartilla and Melba in between Brook Street and Franklin Pier. Rainier heading off to Lindisfarne. And on this side, Derwent is blowing off steam, or she's probably taking coal. I used to load them up with coal there quite a bit in these areas. There's a coal hub nearby. There's 2 of them actually. And there's a few ships down on the left-hand side. What's the name too? That's an Ena there. Anyway, I'm not going to. That largest ship at Prince's 1, 2, that's one. Sorry. I'm not sure, but I think it might be Dalby or something. I'm not sure what it is. And there's another one. This was also another steamer that was built from a ketch. It's Victoria. And she was last used carting limestone from Ida Bay up to Electrona, the cargo company. And there's a train there sitting on the wharf, or the pier, just out into Ida Bay. You can see the engine there, and the fellows there, all the rocks. And Victoria, they're sitting on side. Victoria's still there, by the way. It's sitting at another jetty right in the bay, but she's in shallow water, but she's still intact. How good that is. Been there since 1940 something. Here's two more vessels laid up. Probably this is the 1930s sometime when road transport had moved in and made it. There's a mess. It was before the war because Montgarner was the bigger one there. She went away when the war never came back. And this one here, Star. Star at one stage was able to go up the Huon River beyond Huonville by lowering the mast and the funnel. They were hinged. They could lower them down and go underneath. Interesting. Morse. Another one was a side wheeler. Aberdeen was built at Straw. Grinings, we still run tourist trips around there. Grinings had it, and she did tourist trips there, plus did general trading around Straw Harbour. And she ended up here and was converted into a steamer. She had two reciprocating engines in it, but they weren't matching ones. One was more powerful than the other, so she was then hard thing to steer, go all over the place. But it's interesting, it's taken in Bellerive in the 1930s, but I think it's about 1935, because she's got a Scotch Marine boiler there, which is probably out of either Omaze Victory or Silver Crown. If you look just to the left of the boiler, in the background there you can see a vessel with a lot of sticks sticking up out of it. And that, I think, is Silver Crown, that have been broken up. And she's going astern there, and she's just come from the railway causeway where Victory would have been broken up properly. So that's probably where she's been, because her engine is also there underneath the derrick.
Yep.
It's a black mesh there. And so she's taken that away, most likely to scrap. Although Victory's engine did end up in Victoria. Yeah, so it could be that, I don't know. But that's Morse.
So it's built out of you and Coen, huh?
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, around drawings there.
Oh.
There's a Rory Peter, and there's Excella, and there's people don't know that big grey hulk. Her name was Warra, W-A-R-R-A, Warra. She was built, the Royal ships built during the war for war purposes and things, but that one missed the boat, but she looked no more. Prince Edward Bay. And there's a Port Auckland, Sorrento on the left, Marana on the right, and Cartilla still steaming there, only just that. Because all those ships were steamers, which I know was small. Sorrento, which popular ship, and some of us used to often go to Sunday cruises on Sorrento. There's the engine room, the engineer. I noticed the telegrapher is reading slow ahead, but he's got stopped there. So he's got his hand on the throttle, so I don't know what he's up to there. So whether it's posed or what, I don't know. But I didn't take that photo, but John Duffy, anybody know John Duffy? He claims it was his photo, so that's where it comes. And that one I took, that was a triple expansion engine Sorrento had, and that's the transport was there in August. Now that's where it is, because the fuel got it out of the ship when she was being turned into a fishing vessel. That's Simon and Company compound engine that drove Macquarie. It was a dredger here, the last dog had. That, unfortunately, is on the bottom of the sea at Betsy Island now. She was scuttled with all that in it, which is a shame. Which day? And that's in Macquarie as well, that's in the boiler room. She's been converted to oil firing. There it is there. All that went at the bottom. And of course, the steam crane, which is still there, but wouldn't be able to do that anymore because it's never had a lid on that funnel since it last worked. And the rainwater would have wrecked the boiler running down inside. That should never be allowed to happen. Anyway, that was one of the last ones which ever steamed. That was, July 1970. Empress was Scotland. First trip into Hobart on the 6th. I've got names of the other vessels there. Seaway Queen, one who was that, Arafura and River Derwent. And of course, Sorrento, XL, Lamarana and Cartier were still there in the normal place. Although Sorrento's at the end of what used to be Ferry Pier, well this time it's Murray Pier, it's in there. I can see Nigeria there, and I can also see Aurora. I just hopped on the port quarter there of the head. And I've got a couple to finish it off with when we had a busy time during the bridge disaster period. Waco's was a popular ship because she'd slip along quite nicely, but some of the skippers were a bit, how would I say, laissez-faire a bit, because one of them was a very important man, but he was skipping the ship one day and ran straight bang into the concrete part of the ferry pier wall and put a big dent in it. She didn't stop. But she was popular. And then there's another back here. That's Matthew Brady, I think. Bob Clifford's vessels and Kosciuszko, or Kosciuszka. That's the correct way of pronouncing it. We don't talk about that. Evening Star. You don't see many photos of Evening Star. You'll see it as Denison Star, because it changed the name, which was fairly new there. This was all to do with the West Coast, JLM, the cruiser behind her. They all worked out of Strawn, but she was a human time vessel, another one. Evening Star. Morrison's, and the Morrison's on the West Coast, they're still there.
You had to change the name because it was already registered.
Yes, that's right, yes, yeah. And the ship at King's Pier struck Lagos. That's what you read. The ferry on the right, Emma Lisa, I don't really want to know about her very much because I brought her down from the Hawkesbury River. When she first came here, I was in partnership with the Caravana for a couple of years. And it was Kangaroo when I was involved in it, but I dissolved the partnership, and of course Mr. Fell did his own thing after that, and named her after his daughter. But the other ship on the left is what replaced it, and that's the one that's there today, Spirit of Hobart. And I used to do a bit of part-time work, or voluntary course, on the Sydney Ferry, but Sydney Ferry wasn't in Sydney, it was right in Hobart, North Head, Manly Ferry. That's taken during the Spice and Scenery, 15th of January 1988. I used to be the mate, and I used to work on normally with Captain John Lang. So, that was great, working on North Edge. She was a big ship, good to handle, but she's still around. She's seeing the mangroves, cans, holes in the bottom. All those bad endings, don't they? But that's in Hobart. And of course, we have a little bit of modernity. Ina, the new Ina, or known Roman number one, if you want, was the nickname for her, at the new Brook Street Pier. So we've been right through the whole lot now. We've seen Brook Street Pier in the very early stages of the monarch glider on the side, but and we see now the new one that's there today, which I don't mind, actually, it's quite nice. And it caters for everything. And I think that is it. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you need to know anything, I'm happy to answer questions. If you're interested in having a look at a book, there's a book over there which is a tumble book which you can all flick through and have a look at.